Across the world, police units have sometimes been in conflict with residents of their communities, and their authority has been used to dominate disadvantaged, non-conforming, or dissenting people. After the murder of George Floyd, many communities began to reimagine how law enforcement could work more effectively. In recent years, the U.S. Department of Defense has given or sold at discount weapon-grade material to domestic police units. This military equipment includes automatic assault rifles, armored vehicles, long-range acoustical devices, flashbangs, tear gas, and more. Now, our local police and sheriffs can employ that military weaponry and tactics, and this poses the possibility of military-type police actions in our neighborhoods, such as people peacefully protesting or experiencing mental health episodes. That change has resulted in the move from serving the community to controlling and sometimes even oppressing the citizens of our community. What are the appropriate regulations for use of military equipment in local communities? In response to community demands to restrain the use of war gear in our streets, California passed the new legislation in 2021. This law, AB 481, regulates how militarized the local police should be. AB 481 is a law that requires city councils that govern law enforcement agencies that have acquired military equipment to have the agency publicly post three things: an inventory of military equipment that they own or plan to acquire, proposed policies for its use, and report annually on the deployment of the equipment. Because of AB 481, elected officials with community input must adopt the use policies for each type of equipment and annually review the equipment uses. They decide whether to purchase added equipment, prohibit or restrict any ongoing particular uses. The issue is especially important because of the acquisition of military equipment that can adversely impact the public's safety and welfare, including increased risk of civilian deaths, significant risks to civil rights, civil liberties, as well as physical and psychological well-being. Military equipment has been more frequently used in low-income Black and Brown communities, meaning the risks and impacts of police militarization have been experienced most acutely in marginalized communities.
I was the chair of the subcommittee that was in charge of the 481 project in the city and what we had to do to describe, to work with our police officers, our sworn officers, to figure out what their needs were, to come back to them to see how we could express not only what they needed, but how they needed it, when they needed it, and exactly what language was used in order to make sure that we felt comfortable with them to deploy any of the kinds of weaponry that you were discussing. There was a lot of consensus building, which was the first time that, as a subcommittee, that we had to work with the police in a way that was not only communicative, but we had to come up with compromise. They wanted to know why we felt strongly about certain positions of weaponry and why we thought that, we were making the type of regulations and protocols valid in the field. And that was important to us. But no, did it go the way I expected? Of course not. This was all new to me. I thought we were going to have more of a oversight role when we were more of a collaboration, to be honest with you. This wasn't something where we said, this is what our expectations of our community are. This was, these are the resources you need. Tell us why, tell us how, and see if we can work together to get to a point of consensus.
All transparency, our Reimagining Public Safety Task Force did not actually develop or have very much to do with the implementation of AB 481. And I do think that's a failure of the task force itself for not taking this up. Where we were able to gain more traction was through the community group, through the community movement that was formed through Reimagine Richmond. And through that group, we were able to work with our progressive city council members and really work directly with the coordinator.
Speaking specifically to Oakland, from what I've seen, they're working on getting in compliance, but they're just not in compliance yet. After myself and several other community members complained through public comment at an Oakland Police Commission meeting about OPD not being in compliance with AB 481, we complained about the Police Commission's lack of putting the Militarized Equipment Ad Hoc Committee back together so that they could ensure that the police department got in compliance. So at their next meeting, which is just a couple of weeks later, they did reconvene the Militarized Equipment Ad Hoc Committee, and that went over the course of several months. And they recently stopped convening at a meeting in September, and all of the policies from there went to City Council to be approved.
I experienced the call for accountability and transparency in acquiring equipment as a challenge, because from our agency and my perspective, I felt like we were doing a very good job in terms of not causing harms, and then to deal with this kind of wave of sort of wave of criticism and wave of change. And I think some chiefs can be more prepared to change, but in terms of or evolve, I would say, but it can go slower within the agency because you're dealing with everybody there who's been working, I think trying to, or actually doing good work and feeling criticized. That aside, I mean, that's just a factor in implementation. And I think it's important to have open communication and transparency and have discussions that try to watch out for language that is divisive. And I sometimes feel like I'm maybe Pollyannish about this, but cops are human, trying to deal with the issues they're dealing with, and a lot of discussions can become very conflict-ridden. And so my thing was to try to be honest and upfront, explain why things are needed, and go from there.
We were able to galvanize the community to speak and make sure that we are predominantly Black and Brown community and are not taken advantage of because of this military equipment policy. And so with that community engagement factor, it was really important. The other way was through a collaboration effort through the alliance of our Richmond progressives, city council members, including Claudia Jimenez, our new elect mayor, Eduardo Martinez, and Gail McLaughlin and others. And so that collaboration, even though it wasn't through the task force, was vital to this entire process.
From what I've seen, the risks associated with militarization of police departments, to me, just doesn't pass the cost benefit analysis for a city. Oftentimes the equipment just is like frequently unavailable due to maintenance that it needs, such as the Oakland Police Department's Bearcat is frequently needing maintenance due to all the hard stops and stuff that it needs, that usually when they do want to use it, it's not available anyway, but it's still costing them a lot of money. Equipment that's inherently risky or dangerous that you kind of touched on, Barb, in your opening, just about the nature of a lot of this equipment. A lot of the equipment also adds a negative quality of life for our residents, such as police helicopters or the armored vehicles themselves. And most importantly, there's no empirical evidence that shows that this type of equipment makes us safer. There's no empirical evidence whatsoever. Using paramilitary armored vehicles, just as one example, our Bearcat that you heard me mention is oftentimes in the shop. But when it is out on the streets and when they're using it, and I know that whenever the tactical operations team, which is our name for SWAT team, gets deployed, they always use the Bearcat, even before they know whether or not it even will apply to that situation. And so when you see that thing rolling down the streets, put yourself in the shoes of the residents where this type of equipment is frequently used, which is oftentimes it's Black and brown neighborhoods. People will tell you that seeing these types of vehicles triggers their trauma from previous situations, and that they oftentimes feel like the police are more like a foreign occupying force than actually a force that's there to protect and serve them.
I think, again, language is super important on this. So military equipment to me covers a whole bunch of stuff. And if I just say, well, we need military equipment, then I feel like listeners, people on this panel, and community members will say, oh, he is saying they need tanks, armored personnel carriers, they need government surplus equipment and all that. And I really do, I'm really concerned about that kind of overgeneralization. I do think that the police department has absolutely legitimate need for firearms, for long arms or rifles, and for protective gear, and for less lethal munitions, all to be governed tightly by policy in terms of, and this is like an evolved point of view, but I really recognize and acknowledge the idea that these be covered tightly in terms of policy, not just use, but also the decisions to use, and also the decisions to literally to pull out and expose to the public. Because as chief, I certainly heard community members saying, this is really scary. Like when this rolls up and everybody pulls out rifles, I feel like it's an imbalance between the hazard of the situation, the challenge of the scenario you're dealing with, and a bunch of guys with rifles on. And I hear that, and so did our people, I think.
And so I think one of the biggest failures, I would say, for Richmond was looking even in 481, the mentally deranged person. They had no definition of when we could actually see an officer and what a mentally deranged person meant, and what that means to the community. And that impact, when we talk about mental health crises, using militarized equipment, and the psychological impact of going into a mental health crisis with full guard, and how that is going to escalate somebody. None of that was truly discussed in Richmond's compliance. And having military equipment in our community and the impact it can have physically to a person, psychologically to a person, and then the fiscal impact, I know a couple of people had talked about that. I don't speak in cost analysis for a human life. PD Perez was shot and killed for walking away at Brothers Liquor, and that was 10 years ago. And there's not one day that family does not miss their son. And so there is not a way that we can quantify human life.
Since the beginning of the concept of police, especially in our country, there has always been an aspect of militarization. The whole history of policing, to understand, there has always been this aspect of a controlled force, a military force. And I don't think that's something that's positive. I think that we need to work on changing the way that we perceive the police and the way that the police perceives the community. But our past and our present are very connected. This is a long tradition of what the police were created for here in our country, and how we've utilized them for the last 250 years.
We've looked at demilitarizing our police department from a lot of different angles, even from their uniforms, from using different ranks and titles. And obviously we haven't achieved all that, but it is something that we're working on.
Berkeley is a process, and what we did this year with 481 and the language we created was a great start. And we had great community input. We also got a chance to create a dialogue with the police to say, hey, tell me why you need this. Tell me what situations this is going to be. This is going to help you in your objectives, and you meet your objectives. So, when you have to justify every equipment use and every equipment in your arsenal or in your inventory, that creates a conversation. You're going to have to really take a hard look at what we did. I am in charge of an oversight body. So transparency is everything. And it's one of the obstacles for us to get answers, to get to get change, to start to be a catalyst, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I believe transparency is everything. I work for it and fight for it, and on the board now. There's a lot of work to do. You know, I find out new and interesting things all the time. And that's and that's to Berkeley's benefit as it is to its detriment. You know, we have a good communication loop. You just got to make sure you get in it. And the more that we can get our community and citizens to know what we're doing, how we're doing it, who are the players, what's involved, the more power the community has, period. So transparency is a catalyst for the community to get involved, and that makes our jobs easier and our hand a little stronger when we're at the table dealing.
No, I think transparency can always be improved. I know for the Oakland Police Department, Oakland Police Commission, that work together on getting us in compliance with this. You know, they have their meetings.
There is a required community engagement aspect of AB 481. 6 people showed up. The police outnumbered us in that community engagement. How does that feel? On top of that, it was essentially a time for them to be transparent and showcase all of the wonderful equipment that they would be using. They had equipment on the table. You could also tour the actual facility, one of their armored trucks, if you would like. And so I would say defining transparency for a community is going to be important versus how a police department or a city council also defines transparency. So I would say working with police departments early to see what that community engagement process is going to be, to make sure that the flyers, registration, the locations are really accessible. As a community member, I would say join a community movement. I think that working alone in a silo is really, really difficult. So I would definitely encourage being in community with other folks to grow a grassroots movement, a people's movement, to really hold and there's so many. I mean, Richmond, we have dozens, and I can't imagine how much Berkeley and Oakland have. When we allow military equipment, we are not a military state. When we allow it at this level of every officer carrying specific type of weapons, it sets precedent for us to then move more and more into the militarization. And the hope for 481 is to really have accountability and transparency. And for us in a predominantly Black and Brown community, and I have had weapons, militarized weapons, brought out as a young person. This is not something that allows me to feel safe. So when we talk about safety, I'm glad that, you know, Andrew Greenwood is talking about how police officers feel safe. I wonder how the community members feel safe in regards to policing. And so I really look to reimagine our policing and public safety systems.
There was a lot of dissent for the policies that went forward, even though the police commission signed off on them. There's a lot of community dissent, and I would track that dissent, like either through joining an organization that's involved in this, and track the dissent, see what you can do. Participate in the meetings and complain, things like that. So millions of dollars have been spent, and those are your tax dollars that are being spent. You know, our tax dollars go towards paying for these police departments. Our tax dollars go towards paying their insurance.
I wish we lived in a society, even across our city lines, our regional lines, or national lines, where there wasn't a need for people to have to be police officers to confront dangerous situations. I wish that were the case, but it's not. So then the challenge is how to resolve those situations, minimizing harm and maximizing community safety with the human beings that we employ as police officers.
That this is a balancing act. We're walking a tightrope, trying to make sure that the community's needs, which are first and foremost, should be held above all others. We're trying to balance that with the express needs of the police and what they said they need to do their job. We want to support our police because they're a part of our community. We have to work with them. in order to get a host of things done and to make the challenges of living in a safe environment. We need to work together. And I think a transparency and accountability lends those efforts the support they need.
Wrap up, I just wanted to thank each of you so much for your expertise, your passion, and I appreciate you being here today.